You've been at our church every year for, I don't know, 15 years, around 15 years, and and a lot of people in the room know you, love you, respect you, follow your ministry, follow what you do. But then our church is growing, and there's people in the room for sure who don't know who you are at all. And so I just want you to give us like a 3-minute summary of kind of your background. Tell us a little about your family and your military history and what you've done, and then Mighty Oaks a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I want to thank Pastor Josh for doing this, because this takes tremendous courage to do this right here. And a lot of pastors are not. And the topic of where politics and Christianity meet is just so important, because if not for the pastors and communities addressing these issues, then where do we go? Where do we go? We go to CNN, Fox News. This is where we should be able to come to get biblical truths to these topics. And we can't forfeit these topics over to secular politicians for the future of our next generation. And so thank you for the courage in doing that. My background, I'll summarize it real quick. Come from a long history of military, from World War I, World War II, Korea. My father was the first Marine in our family who served in Vietnam as an infantryman. I served as a Force Recon Marine, was assigned to a JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command Task Force. I did 8 deployments to Afghanistan in that capacity. Both my sons are Marines. One's an Afghanistan veteran as well, and the other, my youngest, Hayden, is still in. He's in the reserves now. And when I came home from my deployments, I had a lot of hardship during my deployments. I lost 15 friends. I was, had a compromise in our operation. I served as an AFO, so like more undercover clandestine logistics to put our assaulters on target to capture whoever was in the top 10 bad guy list, because I was at what I believe to be a premier special operations unit in the world, and I got to represent the Marine Corps by serving that unit. And so losing 15 friends there, having done over 100 of those missions, those clandestine logistical operations to put our assaulters on target. We had this compromise in our operation. I was abducted by a foreign intelligence agency. If you read my book, Saving is Easy, I can't say where now because it's redacted out by the Pentagon, but it's pretty easy to put the dots together where that took place. And I came home and really struggled. I dealt with anxiety, depression, panic attacks. I was diagnosed with PTSD. Had about a 3-year downward spiral, and nearly lost my family through that, and had a battle with suicide. I came to this conclusion that my family would be sad without me, but they'd be better off. And I think for those who follow me know that same hopeless thought finds a home in hearts of over 20 of our warriors every single day. And a lot of people came in and swooped in to help me. And one was my wife Kathy, and some other mentors from my community, from my local church. A man named Steve Toth stepped in and introduced me to a relationship with Jesus. And look, I had tried all kind of things to get well, medication and VA programs, and had professional success and financial success and rebuilding myself professionally. But all those things, some good, some bad, none of those things changed my situation. And it wasn't until I stepped in a relationship with Jesus and made a decision to align my life to the life he created me to live, and be very intentional through this discipleship process to use the Bible as a blueprint for making life choices. And that intentionality behind that led me to restoration, hope, and ultimately to a renewed purpose. And that purpose manifested itself in a deep burden God put on my heart to share what I had discovered with others. And that's where Mighty Oaks Foundation was born. That was almost 15 years ago. And through that last 15 years, we've served over 500,000 active duty service members, veterans, and first responders. For those new here and don't know, this church has been a very huge part. Pastor David Baird and Pastor Ron Woods, and Kelly's here right now, were some of my first board members and served as mentors to me to build that organization. Both of these communities where the Assembly of Broken Arrow and here Love Church has been just instrumental in serving the veterans and first responders in their states and communities. It's been incredible to watch grow and see God just take broken people that enemy designated to be purposeless and no more hope, to turn them around to be kingdom builders and world leaders. It's been absolutely incredible. It's so the work at Mighty Oaks extends beyond just helping those who have faced hardships. We do resiliency programs. That's where I've spoken to over 500,000 troops on bases. We've given away about 350,000 copies of our books. We've taken the successes of faith-based programs to Washington, D.C. Just last week, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was testifying. It was probably my 15th or so time testifying before Congress on faith-based programs. And what that means is the VA right now currently, as we talk about policy, the VA right now's policy is that any program to care for a veteran dealing with anything has to be approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which means that the only solution that the VA is bringing to the table for our veterans is clinical care. And as I get the chance to testify on behalf of Mighty Oaks to them, I'm able to tell them the truth. And the truth is that PTSD, combat trauma, life trauma is a spiritual wound, and a spiritual wound requires a spiritual solution, and that's Jesus. And these doctors and clinicians are like, we want evidence-based data, and well, we actually have it. And by the way, it outperforms clinical trials by 50%. So, and as we look at different administrations, when President Trump was in office, I served as the chairman of the White House's Faith-Based Coalition for Veterans Affairs. In that capacity, we were able to bring programs like Mighty Oaks to be available through the VA and DOD. We were able to bring faith-based solutions to the table. And whether you're a Christian or not, I think most people here would be Christians, but if you are or not, I think we can all agree that if anybody deserves a right to choose faith-based care, it should be our veterans, right? So they have the right to choose, and we should be able to offer that to them. And so we were extremely successful when President Trump was in office with bringing faith-based solutions through the Prevents Bill. We had executive orders signed, we had policy change, and now this new administration, we can't do that right now. So I'm getting to go before Congress and do that on behalf of Mighty Oaks. The last thing we do is we take guys who come through our program, who had been broken, found restoration, and go around the world and help replicate these programs with ally partners around the world. And through that, we have another organization that I serve as the chairman of. I won't mention the name of it, but we do a lot of rescue operations around the world. And if those kind of followed my story, in 2001, when we did the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I went back to Afghanistan to get my long-term, and 2021. Did I say it wrong? 2001. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's when it all started. 2021. But we went back to get my long-term interpreter, Aziz, who's my teammate, my friend, and his wife and 6 kids. And God just orchestrated an absolute miracle that allowed us to do that, but also rescue 17,000 people from Afghanistan. And then we've continued on. We're doing rescue operations all around the world. In fact, I won't mention what's going on and where, but I can tell you that we have 3 rescue operations going on right now. We're rescuing Americans that are being held in the world, so be praying for that. But in Ukraine, we went to Ukraine and did a lot of rescue of Americans that was left behind in Ukraine. That's happened 3 times in this current administration, where Americans have been left by this government. And so we were able to rescue a lot of Americans out of Ukraine, a lot of other people in Ukraine. And Mighty Oaks has also went there and took 300 pastors. I mean, if you imagine, Pastor Josh, we're here on the Sunday, and you look around, you see 50% men, women, about approximately. Next Sunday, we come in, and it's all women, because the men have been conscripted or drafted from our community to go fight to defend the freedoms in our homes and our land here. And so these pastors, I've known little Yvonne since he was 5 years old. I want to go minister to him. I want to go help him. This is my congregation members. But these pastors, they don't know how to eat in the woods, poop in the woods, sleep in the woods. They don't know how to provide medical care or be chaplains. And so Mighty Oaks went in and put a program together, and we trained 300 pastors to chaplains and deployed them to the front lines with the resource they needed in Ukraine. So that's the kind of things we get to do.
It's incredible. There's a lot more that you could talk about, but that gives people a little idea of the amazing impact that you've had, that your life has had too.
I'd say too, if you're really interested in this topic, I have a podcast called The Resilient Show that we're interviewing people, because I just really felt compelled to go beyond the silo of the military community and share this message with others. So I have access to the most incredible guests that we're talking about these. I just had on Sebastian Gorka, Alan West. I was supposed to be interviewing President Trump last week, but everyone keeps trying to kill him, so they had to move the location. And Kayleigh McEnany's coming up, and Eric Metaxas. So I even had Terry Crews on the show. So
there you go.
Yeah. So if anybody's interested in this topic, then definitely check out the show.
Cool, The Resilient Show. I want to jump in to the content today with the first question that we actually addressed this a few weeks ago in the beginning of this series, but a lot of people say the church should stay out of politics. Church should be apolitical. You've been outspoken about the role of the church and pastors when it comes to politics and the separation of church and state and all of that. Can you just share some of your thoughts to start us off on pastors and churches' role in politics?
Yeah, I mean, the enemy, Satan, is a liar and deceiver, and he needs to keep us out of this fight. And pastors, unfortunately, have caved to it. For whatever reason, some would be cowardness, some would be trying to be good shepherds of the flock, and some would be like just not knowing, not informing themselves, taking the time to inform themselves on how to be involved in this. But the ultimate thing that really had bugged me was life, the right for life, the unborn, in the sexual mutilization and indoctrination of the children. If pastors in this country can't stand up in the pulpit in front of the community and speak against those things, if a pastor doesn't have the moral courage to speak against the right for life, if the pastor doesn't have a moral courage to speak against the children in their community, not to be indoctrinated sexually and sexually mutilated, then they should probably step off the pulpit and go do something else. Like, those aren't issues of politics. Those are issues of morality, and the pastors are the truth and voice to those issues. And in special operations, especially in combat, when we're doing combat operations, we always do this thing called red teaming. So what a red team is and they usually pick me to do it because of my mindset and my background. So I'm one of the ones that do a red team, and I basically look at the operation and I put myself in the role of the enemy, and I try to game plan it as the enemy to figure out how am I gonna win whatever scenario we have. And so as we red team this spiritual battle for the heart of America, we have to red team it. And so I'll say, if I was Satan, I would tell the church not to be political. I would do everything in my power as the enemy of the church and the enemy of God's people to take away the godly voice of God's people. And that's what's happening here. And the way it has a impact, and we don't have to guess what's going to happen. We have a historical reference to the beginning of time of how this takes place. If you don't think that there's a correlation with faith and politics, read this book. From cover to cover, this is engaged in politics, political leaders in the governments of the day. Cover to cover, the church, the faith has always been crossed with politics. And it's been God's people that have stood up in the face of politics that have brought us victory. And you can look back to the good and bad. I can take you back to one of my role models in life is a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor. He served in the 1930s church in Germany. And he spoke against the rise of Nazism in Germany. And he spoke boldly about it to the point where people were saying he was a right-wing conservative nutbag. That's what what we would have called a pastor that spoke that way today. Eric Metaxas is a good friend of mine, and people call him a right-wing conservative nutbag. And he's not. He's speaking biblical truths against evil. That's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer did. 3,000 churches, there was 18,000 churches in Germany. 3,000 churches sided with Hitler and Nazism because they were woke of the day. 3,000 churches stood with Dietrich Bonhoeffer saying that we're not okay with this. This is evil and it's going to turn out bad. 12,000 churches said this: we don't get political. We don't engage in politics. We're here to share the gospel. 12,000 churches chose to be silent, and the Holocaust followed. We have a duty as a church, and especially the church leaders, to speak up against evil. We are the moral voice for our country. There's another side of it, not to just beat up on pastors, because obviously I love pastors, and Josh is my friend, but there's a good side of it. There's been times where the church has stood up, where church leaders have stood up in America. I mean, America's a great nation, by the way, guys. We get demonized. America is the greatest nation on earth. It's the freest nation on earth, and it's the most God-focused nation on earth. It is a Christian nation, by the way. If you read the Constitution, you read our Bill of Rights, and you read this book, we align. We are a Christian nation, and our founding principles are founded through biblical values. But we've made some mistakes. Every great nation has made some mistakes. We had allowed slavery in America, and that's not okay. But it was the church and church leaders that used their pulpits and used their voices to speak against the abolition of slavery in America, and led the way, by the way, for the rest of the world to do it. While America gets demonized for it, America was the leader. And around the world today, there's more slavery today than there was during the time of slavery in America. And so America has led that. And I mean, imagine if Martin Luther King didn't speak against slavery as a pastor, right, by the way, and led the abolitionist movement. So we've done some good, too.
I think a lot of times Christians, especially young Christians, and I don't want to be I don't want to generalize it too much, but young Christians get scared that how they're going to be labeled. And I think that's an intimidation factor. We spoke to that a little bit a few weeks ago, an intimidation factor that we're not, if we talk about it, then we're, right-wing conspiracy theorists or whatever. But I think what I've learned, and I think what you've spoken to brilliantly earlier and we'll continue to talk about, is that when we don't, it is being talked about.
It is, yeah.
And if somebody's got to take the moral authority on it, and we as Christians have the moral authority because we base everything on the Word of God, which is where all morals came from anyway. Yeah. And so if we don't, somebody else will. And that's why we're here talking about it today.
Yeah, I mentioned Eric Metaxas. Yeah. If you guys don't know who Eric Metaxas is, I think he's one of the most prolific law authors, especially Christian authors of our age. And he's written a couple of books. He's written a bunch of books, and they're all like #1 New York Times bestsellers. But he wrote a book called "Letter to the American Church," not "Letters to the American Church." That's Francis Chan. "Letter to the American Church," and essentially, it's Dietrich Bonhoeffer's stance for the 1930s church in Germany turned to the modern day America. And if we, as a church in America, don't take the same challenge that Dietrich Bonhoeffer offered the German church, the results will be the same. Yeah. He did a documentary about it as well. It's really interesting, and I think every pastor should read it. I think every Christian should read it, and it really helps clarify a lot of this stuff beyond what we'll do in 40 minutes.
Yeah. Talk about, real quick, we've talked about this before, but just the separation of church and state, that's one of the tactics. It's supposed to be separate. Yeah. Where did that come from?
It's not just a political left tactic. It's a tactic from Satan. I believe this is straight out of Satan's playbook to confuse and deceive us. I mean, Satan is the father of lies, right, and deception and division, and he's used this. So who here has heard of separation of church and state before? Right? Most people think the separation of church and state says that we can't sit up here and talk about politics as a church, and that's not true. In fact, in 1802. Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter, and that letter was a personal letter, not a official political document, on the separation of church and state. So this is not even an official document. It's just a personal letter that he wrote. And the reason Thomas Jefferson wrote this letter, because he believed the church was being persecuted and intimidated to not be able to be the voice of God into government. And so he said, the church has a First Amendment right like every other group. And it should be the separation of church and state is to keep government out of the church, not church out of the government. Separation of church and state was for us to protect us in our First Amendment right to speak in these issues. However, since that letters went out in 1802, Satan has used people to use that term to intimidate, confuse, and silence pastors and church members to think that they can't speak about this topic. That led to, in 1954, what's called the Johnson Amendment, which kind of put some officiality behind the separation of church and state, and they put a clause tied to 501c3 status, which is the nonprofit status for churches, to say that if you endorse a candidate and campaign for a candidate, you can lose your 501c3 status. However, it does still allow us to, and by the way, that's unconstitutional. It's being challenged in the Supreme Court right now, and it should be. However, it does still allow us to sit up here and have conversations like this. We could talk about candidates. We could talk about the candidates' policies. We could talk about what we like and don't like. We could talk about how it aligns with biblical values. We can't have a Trump campaign rally here in the middle of a church because of the Johnson Amendment. But if we did, we could. If we did, the only consequence would be to lose. You could potentially lose your 501c3 tax-exempt status, and you have to pay taxes. So you can still do it. You just have to pay taxes. And I'd say, even though that's never happened once, by the way, it's never happened with all the threats and intimidations. If it did happen, I'd rather serve God than get a tax break. So,
100%.
But look, the whole like separation of church and state. There's a lot of people speak on this. Glenn Beck and David Barton are really big on this. Every year they hold a thing called the Congressional Pastors Conference, and I've spoken at it a couple of times. And what it is, they bring all these pastors in who are fearful of this from around the country. They bring in several Congress members that can speak on this, and then several guest speakers. I spoke at it. Glenn Beck is brilliant at this topic, David Barton, and we basically lay this out so pastors can go back to their communities informed and equipped to be able to speak truth. And so there's a lot of movement behind this.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into our topic today specifically. This is, if you don't know already, immigration and the border has become the #1 topic of the election. And so this is something that's relevant to us. And as Christians, here's the whole reason I picked this topic. I have pastor friends that are like, I cannot believe that you're doing this, like that you're talking about that from the stage. Like they can get behind sanctity of life and some of those things. But couldn't believe that we picked this. And again, it comes out of that first tone setter where we love our people, and our people are confused as Christians. Not all of you are confused as Christians, but that are confused and intimidated by this. As Christians, we're supposed to be compassionate. As Christians, we know the words of Jesus. We know that we're called to care for the orphan. We know we're called to care for the refugee. We know we're called to care for the vulnerable. But Jesus' words, by the way, this is my teaching on this, we're to people, not to governments. How we treat the vulnerable, how we treat the outsider, how we treat, but back to the question, as Christians, how do we do, we want to be compassionate, we want to be loving, we want to be the most compassionate and loving people, yet we know something's off about all that's going on with immigration and the borders. So my question to you is, before we talk about how a Christian engages with it, what's the state of our national security right now? If anybody can speak to this, you can speak to this. And what's really going on at the borders. And we did this with a couple of our messages before. This is not what I want the whole thing to be about. But let's take a few minutes before we talk about how a Christian is involved in this and talk about the facts, because a lot of times we're not hearing the facts.
Yeah, so it's two parts, national security and the border. We'll start off with national security. First of all, I'll say this, Pastor Josh. We are sitting right here, right now, on a pulpit, and we're talking about Jesus. You and I have shared the gospel of Jesus Christ on pulpits many Sundays, thousands of times probably. Your father, Pastor David, who's an amazing mentor to me and a gift to the gospel, like he did it for over 40 years, and he did it freely. And the only reason, there's two reasons why we get to freely share the gospel in America. One is because it's our God-given right that's laid out in our founding documents, where this book, the Bible, aligns with our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. That's this God-given right that we were given. It's very unique. It has never happened before in the history of the world like it has in America. And secondly, those rights, our religious liberties, has been fought, bled, and died for by every military warrior that's donned the uniform since 1775. And it creates a unique opportunity. It's the opportunity for us to stand up here and freely present the gospel. And if you don't know, and it's important to know as we talk about this topic, that is a rare thing. We are part of only 25% of the world that can freely share the gospel. 75%, I've been in 60 countries, many of them with much oppression. 75% of the world cannot freely share the gospel by law. They will be persecuted and even jailed and even executed in some places for sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're part of only 25% of the world that gets to do that. And so when you talk about like our national security, it's very important for Christians for our religious liberties. And we have to protect that as Christians. We have to speak into that as Christians. Our ability to maintain that requires a strong military. And I get to speak to the military all the time. A lot of people think, this generation is not as great as the last. It changes. It's always different. But our military is motivated. They're tough. They have the ability to defend this nation. What we don't have right now is strong leadership. Our military requires a strong commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief of the United States military, who sits in the Oval Office, is the leader of the free world. And you can look through history. When we have a weak leader in the White House, and as commander-in-chief, the world catches on fire. The world is a dangerous place. I can only contrast through facts. In my lifetime, there's only been one president that's kept us out of a new war for 4 years in a full term, and that was President Trump. I remember when he went in office, President Obama, as he handed off, said, it will take decades and generations to remove ISIS. President Trump did it in 5 months. Erased them off the planet because he let our military do their job. He changed the rules of engagement, which saved lives on the battlefield, and took the military off the leash to do what we do best, and that's kill bad guys and protect our nation and protect people around the world who can't protect themselves. And we didn't see one new war in 4 years. Meanwhile, they said he was going to be a warmonger and start World War III. Didn't happen. What we have seen in the last 4 years is us engage in new wars. We see the debacle withdrawal in Afghanistan, which I could spend hours talking about. We see Libya and Lebanon and Iran and Israel and North Korea versus South Korea. We see Taiwan. We see Ukraine and Russia doing all this crazy stuff. We see Iran firing missiles into Israel. Like the world is literally burning down. Why? Because when the world has a weak leader, it's a dangerous place, and that's what we're seeing. And so national security is extremely important. It should be important to all of us as believers or as citizens, much less, but especially as believers. And you know, you look at something like Afghanistan and the way Afghanistan was handled, and again, I could spend hours on this, but it's just a really good example where policy matters. And as you vote, you don't look at the candidates, you look at the policy, especially national security policy. I'm a Christian, and I have a compassionate heart for people who can't defend themselves. I've seen firsthand in Ukraine. I mean, it's over 1 million women and children were killed. When I went to Afghanistan, you know, we get a lot of accolades for us rescuing those 17,000 people in Afghanistan, which is great, but it's a drop of sand on the beach. Like, there's 40 million citizens in Afghanistan. Of those 40 million citizens, 100,000 of our allies. There's 20 million women and little girls that are left there, by the way, who immediately upon us leaving were sexually enslaved in a culture that sexually enslaves women. Little girls as young as 9 years old are being married off and brutally raped by the Taliban. And when I say, it sounds horrific to say, but either the ones that are married off or the ones that are coming from maybe like an ally daughter. When I say raped, I mean like 30 times a day by multiple men until they don't want to live anymore. Like, it sounds horrible to say, but that's the reality we're talking about here. And if you don't have compassion for that as a Christian, like, you really should check your faith. Like, I mean, and by the way, we're funding this. We shouldn't. The American people were lied to say we should have left Afghanistan because we're in a 20-year war, this endless war. We had 2,500 troops there. The entire international community reports were going in a support and advisory role, keeping the Taliban at bay in the mountains of Afghanistan. The entire international community were at Bagram Air Force Base, the most strategic place in the globe between Iraq, Iran, Russia, and China. And by the way, I'll be bipartisan on this. President Trump, in his 4 years, he should have declared that a victory and called the war on terror over in a victory, and then handed that over to the international community. He should have did that too, but he didn't. And our troops were there, but for our troops to be pulled out through this Doha agreement, it left a vacuum. We had 4 Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan in 2021. Now there's 52 Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. And we left Americans there. We left our allies there. We left these women and children alone to be victims. I just spoke last week at a thing called Prosecutors for Prosecutors, and this is just one example. If you imagine, like, our team goes in and gets number 2 on the list, right? We go catch a bad guy. We don't throw him in a military jail. That's not how this went down. We turn them over to the Afghan government, so they go through a democratic process where they have a defense attorney, they have a prosecutor, they get tried for their crimes, because we're trying to create a civil scenario here. They get tried for their crimes, and by a prosecutor, they go before a judge, they get sentenced, they go to jail. When we withdrew from Afghanistan, we let 50,000 of those people out. And then we handed the Taliban over what's called a biometrics list, which names every ally that fought beside of us, every prosecutor, every judge, every district attorney. And they've taken that list with the addresses, and they've went back for retaliatory action to jail, persecute, and execute those. So we're trying to get those people out right now. All this is being done, by the way, with our taxpayer dollars. In that Doha agreement, we give $40 million a week for humanitarian aid. That is managed by the Taliban, and it's being used as control over the people, food, shelter. It's used as control over people. We give another approximately $47 million a week in cash, so 87 a week total, that we're giving your taxpayer dollars to the Taliban. This is not me making it up, by the way. This is real data. That is for counterterrorism money. The 8 people that received that cash, all 8 of them are sanctioned by the United States government for terrorist activity. 4 of them on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list for terrorist activity. One of them is the bin Laden family, who's actively plotting an attack against the United States right now. One of them is the residents of the jailers that are holding 3 American prisoners right now. That's where our taxpayers are going. That money's being used to oppress these people, and we're paying for it.
And this is the key. You say, why in the world are we talking about all this stuff? And he's talking about this data and this money, and it sounds very political. This is the key to my question earlier, which is when we're being lied to, like when we hear about compassion, like we want to be compassionate. Pulling our troops out seems like, well, that's peaceful. That's compassionate. We got to end the war. But what you're describing right now is that by removing them, violence is rampant. By removing them, terrorism is rampant.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. I can name 10 places right now that we have 2,500 troops. We have
Right.
80,000 troops in Japan since World War II. We have 40,000 troops in Germany since World War II. We have 35,000 troops in South Korea, sitting on a 30th parallel, keeping North Koreans from across and annihilating South Korea in South Korea.
Because out of compassion.
It's out of compassion. Like when you leave the United States military and contingents around the world, it doesn't create wars. It prevents wars.
Right.
It protects people that can't protect themselves. So this is the policy that you have to
Yeah.
look at beyond a candidate when you vote. And if you have compassionate heart for little girls in Afghanistan, you say, what's the best policy to protect innocent life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, the southern border and immigration. This is one of
Yeah.
the biggest topics in America right now. What's happening on the border?
Yeah.
Talk about that. Like, what's happening on the border? And as Christians, like, what do we think about the border? What do we think about
It is the
immigration?
number one poll wise. It is the number one topic in this current election, the border. One of the interesting things about this election that we haven't seen before is when it comes to the border, you don't have to guess what's going to happen. You have two candidates that served for 4 years in the White House. One was President Trump, who ran the first time and won the election pretty much on the southern border, and then you have Vice President Harris, who's the border czar. She was in charge of the border. So you have a very clear contrast. You can pretty much pick which policy you want and vote on that as the number one issue on the ballot. But the Bible talks quite a bit about compassion, obviously, and it talks about borders. In fact, the 12 tribes of Israel was founded by God, and it says there's borders there. And then you have on immigration, Jesus was a refugee. Jesus migrated to Egypt. So there's all these topics. But Nehemiah built a wall. I mean, he built a wall because God called him to build a wall. He had a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other to defend that border. So the Bible over and over talks about borders. It talks about immigration. But we as Christians really have to debate where that line lands and where's compassion and open arms come as far as enforcing the border. And we are the most compassionate country in the world. People will say they're not, but the stats show it. The stats in the last 3 years have been pretty skewed, so I'll go back to 2020. In 2020, we let in 50 million people immigrate to America legally. 50 million legally. That's the most in the world. Number two, Germany, 15 million. 15. We're compassionate.
Yeah.
We open our borders. This
Yeah.
is a nation of immigrants,
Yeah.
and America loves immigrants. It's the American dream. But if we're the shining light on a hill, we're the place that people are lining up. People aren't lining up to leave. People are getting on a piece of trash and floating across from Cuba to Florida because they want to come here. If we always want to be that, then we have to be able to be something worth coming to,
Yes.
and that requires borders. That requires a criteria for entry.
Yeah.
And there should always be a criteria for entry. I mean, hey, look, you want to know where else, Christians, you want to know where else has a criteria for entry? Heaven. Heaven has a criteria for entry, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
we have to have some kind of standards. I mean, I'm not going to let someone come to my house because I'm compassionate for them without knowing who they are. I need to protect my wife and my children.
Right.
Like, who are these people?
Right.
If they're going to come into my house and have dinner, if they're going to come into my house and sleep in my house,
Right.
like, I want to know who they are. I have to protect my children first. My house has to be worth, or at some point, my house is going to be worth even coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have. One of the things about America is we have some incredible social programs. Some I love, and some I don't. I'm not in agreement with all the social programs we have. But one thing no one can say is we don't have really good social programs. We do. We offer a lot to the most needy. You can't have a country that has all these social programs and have an open border. You have to pick, right? You could shut the border down and have tons of social programs, or you could open the border and have no social programs, but you can't have both, or else it collapses. If the whole world comes and takes all of our social giving, we can't sustain it, right? So you have to have some balance there, and so that's why we have to have some criteria in the border. But right now, look, we have this is crazy. Talking about national security, I want to read some numbers. First of all, one of the most atrocious things as a consequence of our borders is sex trafficking. By having an open border, we created a sex trafficking system where people were bringing little girls into this country in record numbers. They come in. Secretary Mayorkas didn't even know. He was asked to come. He didn't even know what they were. The wristbands that these little girls have to be able to identify them and place them with their traffickers. And I love our customs immigration people, by the way. This is not on them. They were moving them by group based on the wristbands that the traffickers put on them to move, and by order by the government, they were moving them in these groups. They were handing them over to their traffickers. And the secretary didn't even know this. And so we created an industry of sex trafficking for these little girls. And with the border open, it's just free game. Drugs, I mean, not just from a drug use standpoint, but from a national security standpoint, China is pumping fentanyl through the southern border to kill our citizens. And it's coming through in record numbers through the border. And on a national security standpoint, as a military guy, look, don't judge me on this, but in the past, me and one or two of my friends crossed the border illegally, slipped into other countries to do those countries harm. Was my job. And we did that well. And there are bad guys that want to come in our country to do our country harm. It's estimated that 500 military-age fighting males are coming across our border every day, every single day, 500 a day, from countries like Syria, China, Pakistan, coming across. When they get caught, they're standing at the position of attention, like a young military guy would do, or because then they're facing authority. They're standing at parade rest, and instead of being arrested, they're being sent all over our country, flown by our government all over the country, and we don't know where they are, we don't know what they're doing, we don't know 500 a day. That should terrify anyone, but regardless who you're voting for. It took 19 people to do 9/11. 19 of them did 9/11. 500 a day. This is not, again, made up numbers. The director of ICE just released this. Like, this is within this month. The director of ICE released this. Since this administration has taken office, we've had 13,099 convicted murderers come across the border in our country, free on the streets. 13,000 convicted murderers in our country, in our cities. We have 15,811 convicted rapists running around our country right now that have come across the border. The customs catches them, and they can't do anything about it. We have 425,431 convicted criminals of other crimes that came across our border and have been released into cities in America, and another estimated 2 million of them that have not been caught or identified. And so when President Trump gets up there and says this crazy stuff, he's like, they're letting out of mental institutions, they're letting out, they're emptying their jails, and we're like,
nobody
oh
believes
man,
him.
Don't say that. Like, we're all like, oh my gosh, why is he saying that? They're eating our cats. You're like, why did he say that? And 3 days later, you find out they're actually people going to town hall say they ate my cat, they ate my dog, they went to the park where I took my kid to feed the ducks bread, and they caught the ducks and they're eating our ducks. Like, these are the people that are coming across the border.
Yeah, well,
it's true.
I think having you here, like Chad's somebody who, I don't know one human being who's done as much as you, as far as in this realm, that's literally rescued people. The money that's been raised, you've put your life on the line many times, including in the last few years, putting your actual life on the line to go rescue people. This is a man who's done so much, and yeah, you can clap. But the reason that I was so excited that you were able to come and speak to us about this is the same with these other topics, is we just need somebody to tell us the truth. Yeah. And sometimes, speaking of President Trump saying those things, you do. He says those things and it seems like it's rhetoric. It seems like, and then you find out, no, this is actually true. Like, these numbers aren't from former President Trump. These numbers are from the director of ICE. Came out. When that came out, I was like, man, we're talking about that in a couple weeks. That was already planned. But these are the facts of what's actually happening. And as we transition to how do we think about this as Christians, this stuff's very important. Yeah, I mean, look right now, next door to you guys, North Carolina and South Carolina, you have one of the worst. We thought Katrina was bad. This hurricane was one of the worst. I mean, people, and we have an administration that's not showing up, and FEMA doesn't have money to give them. They've been promised $750 per family, not per person, per family. And you're promising, now you have to go on a federal application, which is a nightmare. I don't have internet. I don't have power. I don't have a house because it's gone, but I have to go apply for this $700. What am I going to do at $750? Meanwhile, we have $24 billion this year, $200 billion total, $24 billion this year that went to Ukraine, billions to Ethiopia, to Lebanon, to Iran. This week, 2 days ago, this may shock you, while they're saying they don't have money to give to the families, they're out of money to give to the families in North Carolina, we gave $157 million U.S. taxpayer dollars to Lebanon for their humanitarian crisis. That's not compassion for our people, right? We're giving $9,000 per individual, not per family, to illegal immigrants coming across. We just spent $20
million to build an immigrant welcome center in San Diego. That's what FEMA's spending money on. But you can give our people $750 and make it impossible to give it to them. I promise you, the illegal immigrants don't have to go on a 4-page website and apply for that money. They're giving it to them in cards. But that's not happening for our own citizens. This should be a problem. This is a problem that we have to speak against.
Well, and it's biblical. It's biblical. Everybody needs to hear this. Taking care of, if there is abundance left over to take care of other people, praise God. But the call of the Bible is to take care of your home first.
Yeah.
Like our physical home with our family, and it works out from there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the pattern of the gospel. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. It's always home first, and then you move out, because you move out in strength. Yeah. So let's talk about the most important thing. We've got a few minutes left. Why it's so important for Christians to know this stuff, but then to engage. Like, why is it important for Christians to engage and to vote, but then other ways to engage?
I believe that voting for Christians, voting isn't a right; it's a duty. If you are a believer, it's a duty for you to vote.
Can you explain why? Well,
because I'll give you some numbers. We have 90 million self-proclaiming evangelical Christians in America. 90 million. It should almost make your stomach turn to know how many voted last cycle. 35 million of us voted last cycle. 35 million. 55 million chose to do what the 12,000 churches did in 1930s Germany. Say, I'm not getting political, I'm gonna sit it out. And most of them did it because they like, I can't, my conscience won't let me do it. I can't align with the candidate, so I'm just gonna sit it out. A no vote in this election, in many elections, a no vote is a vote. It's a vote for evil. And by the way, you may not like hearing this, you may get upset at me saying this, but if you don't vote, you're complicit in evil in this country. You're complicit. Because we get mad at the news, we get mad at Washington, D.C., we're like, this politician's corrupt, and whatever side you're on, you get mad at politicians. But the problem isn't the politicians in Washington, D.C. They're part of the problem. The problem is us.
Yeah.
It's us, because if 90 million Christians would vote their biblical beliefs, not for who I say as a candidate, but read this book and find the policy that aligns closest with this. Maybe it doesn't 100% align, because there's no candidate that's going to be 100% perfect, by the way.
Right.
If you're married, you know that you can't pick a 100% perfect person. Right. But the one that aligns mostly with this, and if you simply vote that biblically, we're going to be okay. We are part of the problem by not voting, but we're also part of the solution, because if 90 million of us vote, 90 million votes in America wins an election. We will get this country back by that. And so a no vote is a vote. And we have no one to blame but ourselves.
We talked about this, sorry to interrupt you, but we talked about this in the first week. We're not trying to make America, this is not a theocracy thing. We're not trying to force our beliefs on people. And if you weren't here, I just want to say this again. You're not forcing yourself on people. This is constitutional. We each get one vote. Yeah. So when you're voting, you're not pushing anything onto somebody else. They can vote the way they want to vote. It's impossible to push something on someone. Right. You're just being represented. Right. And if we want our country to represent our country, then the people in our country need to be represented by voting. Yeah, and that's where this whole separation church and state thing is, and this intentional silencing of the church by the enemy is to keep you from going to the polls, to keep you from feeling you need to engage in the political process. But there's no one that should be more engaged in the political process than the Christian. Yeah. I mean, and even if you don't say no one should be more, like, at least you should acknowledge that we have as equal a right as anyone else to represent our biblical views in the poll. And there's so many things that you could do to vote, but I think one of the things that's important to do is vote. But there's some other things you could do too, and even beyond voting and take action is to get engaged in your community in this stuff, to call things out. There's a man named John Emachukwu. I just interviewed him on a podcast. Incredible man. He's at the Upper Room Church. And he's an associate pastor at Upper Room Church in North Carolina. And that church is really big on abortion. They're in an inner city black community, and they go in before because Planned Parenthood is a racist organization with the initial agenda to eradicate the black community in America. That's the agenda of Planned Parenthood. I mean, there's only 4% of ovulating black women in America, but almost 50% of abortions are in the black community. It is a Marxist, racist
center to eradicate the black community in America. So they're there every week. They're there saving babies and praying for women, and it's amazing. But he was just so moved by some of the things that were happening in our community that he chose to be a voice. And so he had found out about, and this is one example that I'm just giving you guys of something you can do besides voting. He found out that in our schools that there was these pornographic books that are in elementary schools. And I mean pornographic. I mean, like, and this is in your community too, by the way. Yeah. Like elementary schools in the libraries have books on how to be LGBTQ plus whatever, how to use anal toys, how to do sexual penetration. It sounds harsh, but this is what's happening, right? That's how to get introduced to homosexual sex acts in vivid pictures, like pornographic pictures. Like I would not show them up here. I would not read some of the stuff that's in. But so he was like so disturbed by this. He's like, I'm going to the school board meeting, and I'm going to go in. And he walks into the school board meeting. He lays the book down. He doesn't say anything about his introduction. He starts reading the book, reading this sexual filth that's being and they're like, sir, you can't, sir, be quiet. Like, and he keeps reading, and they keep trying to interrupt him. He's like, I'm sorry, did I say something that offended you? If we can't, in a room full of adults, read this out loud, then why could this filth be in our libraries with our children? Yeah. And this man did what every Christian man in his community could do, because you go to school board meetings, what you're going to see is a few mama bears, and I'm thankful for them. But when a man, a 6'4" black man with a voice of thunder stands in front of that school board meeting and says, why are you reading this filth to my children? Do something about it or we're going to get rid of you. That's different. Yeah. And if men in this church would do something like that in their community, things would change. And I love this man, by the way. You got to hear the podcast with him. He's an amazing force. But, I mean, that's what we need. Yeah. And voting's important because, I mean, you got things on the ballot like full-term abortion. And by the way, I'll say this. A disclaimer, I am a surrogate on President Trump's campaign for veterans policy. I was in 2020, I'm doing it again. So I say this as a surrogate, but I love this country enough to speak truth, and even if it goes against what President Trump is doing. President Trump, but there's no candidate on the ballot that is a pro-life candidate, including President Trump. That's the truth. Yeah. And people that support President Trump maybe get mad at me for saying that. Shh, don't say that. It's true. Yeah. He's not a pro-life candidate. J.D. Vance, I think he's a Christian. I think he's an amazing man. He's not a pro-life vice president. They have agreed to do a 15-month ban on abortion, which should be the opposite. They get 15 months to have 95% of abortions happen in the first 15 months. Yeah. These are not pro-life candidates. Yeah. 15 weeks. 15 weeks. Sorry. Yeah, you guys are quick on that. There's a fact checkers everywhere. I mean, 95% of abortions happen in the first 15 weeks. So to say President Trump's a pro-life candidate, I just not being honest. So I have to be honest. But a vote for the other side, or a non-vote for President Trump is a vote for the other side, is full-term abortion. So you have to make the hard choice. And no one wants to say, hey, we got to pick the less of two evils. Yeah, you actually do. You actually do.
If you want less evil. Yeah,
if you want less evil. You have to. And as Christians, we have to. We can't, gender-affirming care, like the sexual utilization of our children. Governor Waltz, Tim Waltz, and he's, I'll be respectful and call him Governor Tim Waltz because it would be inappropriate for me to call him Tampon Tim here today. But I couldn't help it. But the reason they call him that is because he signed a bill to put tampons in elementary school boys' bathrooms. Yeah. I mean, how could you be okay with that as a Christian? How could you be okay with the fact that he signed a bill for full-term abortion up to the day of birth? If you think that's rhetoric, call an abortion clinic in Minnesota and say, hey, I am 8.5 months pregnant and I don't want to go through with it. Will you abort my baby? Mm-hmm. They're going to say yes. Yeah. If you don't believe it, do it. You don't have to believe me. Yeah. Just make the call. He signed a bill saying that as the governor, he signed a bill saying that if a parent, one or both of the parents, do not affirm gender transition of a child, the Minnesota government will take that child from you. And they could do it without your consent. They could do the surgery without even the parental knowledge. we have to vote against this
And
stuff.
and what you're saying, this sounds crazy that I have to say it, but it's true.
Yeah.
That's not rhetoric.
That's not rhetoric. You can look it up.
That's fact.
Like, don't
yeah.
believe. By the way, don't believe me. Don't believe anyone you hear. That's the problem with America right
Right.
now.
Right.
People believe people like me. I have a podcast. People believe people like me, and they like me, so they believe me. They like someone else. They like Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. And don't believe any of us. Americans need to inform themselves. Be on the headlines. Inform yourself. Do the research. It's important.
Yeah.
Our future depends on it.
Absolutely.
Our future depends on it.
Absolutely. And then once you are informed, then you have the Word of God, which hopefully, if we're doing our job, we're informed on as well as Christians. And then you align it the best you can. You engage with the vote, and then you can engage in these other ways. Tell us how you vote. You explained how you go and choose your vote each time, no matter who you're voting for.
Yeah, I have a process. And first of all, I want to close with saying this. Donald Trump, as a surrogate on his campaign, is not our savior.
Yeah.
Christians need to know that.
Yeah.
There's no candidate that's our savior.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is our savior.
Yeah.
That's our savior.
And if I can, it's dangerous to interrupt you because
Yeah.
I want to let you say what you're going to say. But no matter what happens in this country, and with religious liberties and all of that, like, we'll still serve Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Take away all our rights, we'll still worship. Make it illegal to preach, we'll still preach. Make us pay taxes, we'll pay taxes. So it's not a thing where we need religious liberties so that we can be Christian.
No, we don't need the religious. We don't need our 501c3 tax exempt status.
But
we don't need our religious freedoms.
But
we're going to be Christians no matter what.
But we have logic, and we care about our kids, and we know that this is a great nation, and we want to preserve the greatness that we have and the liberties that we have, and we want to continue to be strong so that we can we've also sent the most missionaries so that we can continue to be a light in darkness for the entire world.
I mean, we could be on this pulpit doing what we're doing right now, broadcast across the country,
Yep.
or we could be in a basement somewhere secretly doing it like they're doing in China. I mean, we should fight for that. We have to fight for that.
Totally.
So for
sorry,
me,
keep going,
my first of all, like, again, I make sure that I'm not worshiping any candidate. I don't align with any political party, by the way. I'm not a Republican or Democrat. I will never be owned by a political party. They won't get my party line vote. I'm going to vote for the people up and down the ballot that most represent my biblical values.
Awesome.
That's how I'm going to vote. And so for me, I look at policies and I look at cabinet. Very easy right now because one candidate is showing their policies and the other candidate isn't. One candidate is showing their cabinet and the other candidate isn't. By the way, Donald Trump's cabinet is like the Avenger. It's like crazy. I mean, you have Elon Musk that's going to come in to be over government efficiencies. You have J.D. Vance. You have RFK over the Secretary of Health. I mean, a guy who's sued Big Pharma his whole career and actually is healthy. You seen the current Secretary of Health? My gosh, don't show a picture of her, or him or her, whatever it is. But I mean, you got Vivek, that's probably will end up being the Secretary of State. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who served our military and came over from the Democratic Party to be probably Secretary of VA. You have this Avenger squad. But the cool thing about this is how this cabinet represents how our government's supposed to be. Our founders never meant it for us to have career politicians. Our founders thought that people should come from industry, leave industry, sacrifice. President Trump's lost $1 billion since he's entered this. Elon Musk has nothing to gain by coming in the government. He has only things to lose. But they would sacrifice, serve the people with their industry experience, and then go back there. But we have people like President Biden, Nancy Pelosi, I'll go to the other side of the aisle, Mitch McConnell, that have served their whole career. They go in office. You can only make as a congressman $200,000 a year, and you're allowed to make another $25,000 more. But somehow they go in worth $100,000 and they come out worth millions. Career politicians and term limits should be a thing, but they're not. So let's vote people in that are coming from industry who want to serve and do it the way it was supposed to be done, not for personal gain, not to be career politicians. So I'll digress and go back to my method of voting. I try to pick 5 things that are most important to me. And I look at those 5 things, and I don't look at the individual. I look at the policies and say what most aligns with what I want, what I believe, and what most aligns with biblical values. And for me, in this election, I pick life, the right for life. And again, even without a pro-life candidate, I pick the one that most aligns. I pick my individual liberties, especially my religious liberties. What candidate's policies are going to protect my individual liberties and my religious liberties the most? especially as I use religious liberties as a method to help people at Mighty Oaks. And I know this firsthand because I'm testifying before Congress. I'm doing this at the White House. And I look at national security because without our national security, we could do none of it. I look at our national security and how the candidate will support our military and not feed into the warmongering neocon industrial military complex, which I despise personally. I look at our America First economy because if we can't invest in America, we will never be able to help people abroad. You mentioned this earlier. And I look at what policies allow us to care for the most vulnerable. Those 5 things, I pick not which candidate, which policies most align with that. And then I vote. And by the way, the president is not the only person on the ballot. You need to know who you need to know who your school board officials are. You need to know all those things. Spend time, because we are lazy as Americans to do this. We're not intentional. The only way you're going to make good decisions and vote and turn this country around is if you inform yourself. We have to take time to do that. That's important. This is so important.
Yeah, so good. First of all, put your hands together for Chad.